Welcome back to Studio 10.
This year, we mark 150 years since the American Civil War. But what is the lingering impact of that war today, and are its lessons still relevant? Author Charles McNair examines those questions in a novel called Pickett's Charge. It's the story of the oldest living Confederate veteran, determined to kill the oldest living Union soldier, but through his journey he confronts long-held beliefs to eventually learn along the way. Charles McNair is joining us this morning to talk about this fascinating new novel, Pickett's Charge. So tell us a little bit more about the novel to begin with. First of all, it's set right here on the Gulf Coast. A lot of it is in Alabama.
The entire book is set in Alabama. It's the story of a 114-year-old man who is too mean to die. He has nursed a great grudge, like the South did following the Civil War. And when he finds out there's just one Yankee left alive way up north, he leaves his nursing home here on the shores of Mobile Bay, paddles a canoe across the bay, and strikes out for the north to fight the last battle of the Civil War.
This sounds incredible. I can't wait to read this book for myself. What was your inspiration? How did you get this novel started?
My dad grew up in Troy, Alabama, and when he was a boy, he stood in a general store there at the side of a living, breathing Confederate veteran, a man who had fought at Chickamauga and other places in the war. And I always wondered about that old soldier. Where was he on the scale of things? Had he forgiven and gone and moved on from his old past grudges? Was he at peace with himself, or was he smoldering inside the way a lot of Southern people still seem to be over what General Sherman and others did during the war? I live in Atlanta, so you know, sometimes you meet people, they still smell powder in the air from Sherman burning the entire city down, the largest American city ever burned to the ground. And so
it's so interesting what lessons history teaches us, and if people look toward history enough to learn from those lessons, and that's kind of what this journey is about. Do you see a parallel between this book and recent racial tensions, say in St. Louis, Ferguson, that kind of scenario?
You know, the Civil War, for one reason, was waged to settle the problems of race. Obviously, those problems are not settled, and not only obviously, but the fact that people have held to their grudges and held to, instead of forgiving and moving on, has created situations where you have incidents like that, and like Rodney King, and like the young man in Sanford, Florida, who was shot, and you have churches bombed, and you have atrocities, you know, on either side, and hate on either side. And so the question central to this book is, at what point do you forgive and move on, and at what point is vengeance or justified in some way? It's a complicated question. And my old man, Threadgill Pickett, loses a brother to the Yankees, a twin brother, and he's disfigured. So think of the South as, you know, that he symbolizes, a region defeated in war, a region that lived under the shadow of its conquerors for 100 years before the South really began to emerge in the 1960s and confront the issues of race and other questions that had, you know, they had just sort of swallowed and not dealt with for so long.
Even though it's a novel of fiction, so many of these things that we're talking about are nonfiction, and I think so important to be discussed and for people to think about and read about in novels such as Pickett's Charge. I want to briefly stray away from that and ask you about your first novel. It was a long time ago. Why has it taken you so long to write another one? And tell us about that first novel. You received an incredible nomination for that.
My first book was Land of Goshen. Mm-hmm. It too was set in Alabama, although around Dothan, my hometown. And I was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for that book.
It's incredible.
Published in 1994, and it's been 20 years, if you can do your math, since then. It also happened that my beautiful daughter Bonnie was born the same year that first novel published. So all these years I've had a first priority that wasn't writing fiction. But here, after 20 years, is a book I'm proud of, and I'm proud of that daughter too. I hope I've done a good job having my priorities straight.
No doubt about that. So, where can the folks get your new novel, Pickett's Charge? How can they obtain a copy of this?
I am a big fan of the independent bookstores, so Page and Palette would be great in Fairhope. Here in town, there's the bookstore Bienville Books. I believe they would carry it. Also, any of the big chain bookstores, the Barnes and Nobles of the world, and also on Amazon.
Okay.
You know, the words are the same no matter where you buy the book, and the story is, I hope, a rip-roaring, good, tall tale that will entertain and also make people think about who we are.
Well, it sounds great. I can't wait to read it myself. You need to pick yourself up a copy of Pickett's Charge, the new novel by Charles McNair. Great to have you back after your 20-year absence there. Thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Chastity, sounds like a fascinating read.
It does.